What is the most messed up thing someone admitted to you while intoxicated? My father has always had a drinking problem, but until I was 17 or 18 I didn't really acknowledge it. He'd been such a distant part of my life by that point I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Suddenly, when I turned 18, he started calling a lot. He started trying to convince me to come out and live with him. I wasn't biting, obviously, and I know he was just trying to reconnect with me probably, but at that point I was angst, having just gone through a really bad breakup. I didn't want to move in with him. I wanted to go to college and live on my own. Didn't stop him from calling me, though, and the longer I refused the more often he would call me while he was out of it. At first it was innocent enough. His words were slurred and he jumped haphazardly from topic to topic, but it was pretty easy to get him off the phone so I didn't have to deal with it. One night I was up late finishing a paper. It was 1:30 in the morning and he called. I was tired and felt guilty for having not talked to him in about 2 months, so I picked up. I could damn near smell the tequila through the phone. It was so bad. I remember him sounding very somber, like he was at a funeral. He'd been crying too, I think, because his voice was kind of scratchy. Not grumbly, like a drunk person, but scratchy. He started talking about memories of when he was a kid. He described to me a time when he and my grandfather had gone fishing early one morning when my dad was about 9 years old. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing. My grandfather had woken him up at about 5 in the morning and told him to get his overalls and tackle box because they were going and my dad had no choice. Wasn't a huge deal anyway because my dad loved his dad and he loved to fish. They got out on the lake in a rowboat and set out their lines and sat in silence for about half an hour before my grandfather spoke. He told my dad about how, shortly after him and my grandmother had gotten married, she had gotten pregnant with what would have been my dad's older brother. About halfway through the pregnancy there were complications and my grandmother ended up miscarrying. It almost tore the two apart romantically, for obvious reasons, but they stuck it out and a year or two later along came my dad, followed in fairly quick succession by my 3 aunts. As he's telling me this, I'm convinced I'm dreaming. I had fallen asleep at my desk and was now having some sort of avant-garde nightmare. It had to be. Obviously I wasn't, but the whole thing was very surreal and only got worse. My dad went on to explain that the reason he told me that story was because he wanted to tell me something about when my mom had been pregnant with my sister who is 5 years older than I am. My dad has always loved music, and up until a few years after he and my mom divorced he was in a band. So he's telling me about how a few months into the pregnancy, his band was really starting to get going and everything was looking up. My mom, however, was worried because he was spending so little time at home with her, and she was pregnant so she was also worried he wouldn't be home much when the baby came either. She supported his love of playing music, but she needed him at home too. He told me that one night, when my mom was sleeping, he'd gotten home from a bar fairly drunk and had been mulling over his situation. He could keep playing all the music he wanted and live a life he had dreamed of since he was a teenager, or he could grow up and be a man. There was no middle ground with him, apparently. He couldn't just cut back on the music a little, it was either all music or all family. He said he stood over my mom for a long time with a fist clenched, contemplating whether or not he wanted to Iron Mike her in the stomach. He said he was so close to doing it that he had even turned her gently so he could have a clear target. He ended up not doing it, of course. He spewed some stuff about how he decided he would grow up and be a man, how he knew what he had to do, and how God had spoken to him in that moment and guided him on his true path. I told him not to call me ever again and hung up.